right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Thought Crimes, the podcast where no topics are off limits. If you or I or Jason were able to learn even one thing today, then I think we've accomplished our mission. So today we will be talking about bread and circuses. But before we get into that, let's slightly stay on topic here. And Jason, maybe tell me what you do to pass the time. What mind-numbing activities, what guilty pleasures do you do when you've got a bit of time to kill?
Well, let's keep it real. We all waste a little bit of time. There's all those things that we do that we know we shouldn't, but it just pulls us out of reality for a little while. And it's kind of funny because we did a podcast on productivity, and it was the complete antithesis of that. But I see the time wasters kind of as the rest, the respite between the bursts of productivity and the discipline. But for me, what I got two. I'm almost ashamed of them because they're so silly, but
We all have them.
they do me well. And the first one, and this always happens in the wintertime when the days are short and the nights are long, it's cold out. I always get a video gaming binge. And right now, my go to is Skyrim. And
Nice, an old classic.
good old classic. It's fun. It's open. You can do whatever you want. It's not linear. Just a good, well made game, bugs and all. But let's take that to the next level. One thing that you can do in Skyrim is there's different DLCs. One of them is the Hearthfire DLC. And with that downloadable content, you can create more player homes. So you can make it like a nice little home base for your guy, go out, do your adventures, come back, you have a nice, virtual house. But the internet being the internet, and that game being on PC also, a bunch of people modded it. So now there's
Right.
like castles and this and that. And I'm finding myself on YouTube watching like mods of a game that I don't even have on PC. So I couldn't even download those mods if I wanted, but they're cool and I still play the game even though it's on PlayStation. Complete waste of time, but it's entertaining. I like it.
So I do the same thing with Warcraft 3, right? Not World of Warcraft people. I've never played that game. I don't have that much time to sink into a game. But Warcraft 3 was my old like high school favorite, right? So a strategy game. And I've recently, with my new computer, I recently got Warcraft 3 Reforged so I can play with the new skin now. But what I do even more than play Warcraft every once in a while when I do have time is that I go on YouTube and I watch the world champions play Warcraft.
Exactly. I've probably watched more hours of Skyrim than I've played hours of Skyrim
Yeah,
recently.
yeah, and it's a big thing. Like esports are blowing up, right? Actually, that's an episode we could cover at some point. Is esports, right? Like the phenomenon that is watching people play video games professionally and win huge prizes. What's that kid who won? Oh, what is it? Like several $1 million. He became the champion of Fortnite.
Oh man,
Do you remember hearing about that?
no, but like all the big names, even things like StarCraft, Counter Strike,
Hmm.
PUBG, like those tournaments, they pay out when you're up there.
Yeah, Dota. Yeah,
Yeah.
League of
It,
Legends. That's a big one
it's
too.
all battle royales now, eh? The bigger games.
A lot of them. Well, I know like Fortnite is. So is the free the COD one, the Call of Duty. It's also a battle royale.
Uh,
Warzone. It's called.
well,
Yeah.
that's a smart model. They make it free, but then you have to pay for all the microtransactions as you go to get the
I
stuff.
Yeah. I haven't gotten into Warzone, but I assume it's more micro stuff. Yeah,
Yeah.
or skins and
But
shit
like,
like that.
how
But
lazy are we that you don't even have the energy or the willpower to play a video game, but you'll go on the internet and watch
yep.
someone else play a video game?
Yeah.
Like it's kind
Yeah.
of sad when you think of it that way.
Yeah, but I'm not gonna lie. I actually like this is I shouldn't admit to anybody in the outside world, but like watching like the Warcraft 3 people for me is almost therapeutic at this point. Where I use it, I often like fall asleep to it, or it's really like as much as it's mind numbing. I'm still watching people play the best people play a really good strategy game as best as they can, right? So it's still like a some mental stimulation. So
Eh,
I enjoy it.
But later, when we get into the mean potatoes of the discussion, we'll talk about sports, right? Well, we could easily what we're going to cover when we speak about sports could easily be related to what we're talking about for video games here. Not to give too
Yeah,
much
yeah, for
away.
sure. For sure. And speaking of sports, I just watched the Super Bowl last weekend.
Hmm.
Tom Brady won his seventh Super Bowl ring, which is I mean, first time it's ever happened in history by far. I think this the so he's appeared in 10 Super Bowls. He's won 7, and I think the second most appearances at a Super Bowl is 5.
Wow.
So he's dwarfed that.
He's the
And
outlier
then,
of all outliers.
oh yeah, big time. And he now has kind of gone an extra step and proven something even more, is that he won 6 rings with the New England Patriots. So his one franchise now moves to a next franchise, goes to the Tampa Bay Bucks, and first year there wins a Super Bowl with them. Right. So it not only is it like
Okay.
it can prove the haters who are like, oh, it's just because of New England or good coaching or whatever you want to say. It's like, no, he actually took his winningness to another team and won.
So I didn't follow the NFL at all. I hardly ever do. But how did the Patriots do this year?
Pretty terrible. Yeah, they got Cam Newton and they ended up not making the playoffs.
Hmm.
I think they were below 500. Like, yeah, they didn't do well at all. So
So Brady was really the ingredient, or one of the main ingredients in there.
yeah, oh, absolutely. Like if you want to look at the last 20 years of the New England Patriots, absolutely Brady. Like you can't mention anything good about the Patriots without mentioning Brady
Man,
for
I
sure.
love the internet though. I saw like all the memes of the Super Bowl and everything. But the best one was, and never forget, Ric Flair still has 8 more world championships than Tom Brady. It just got Ric
Nice.
Flair like in the 80s with the mullet and like the frizzy hairdo and like the bleach blonde and the great big sunglasses and wearing like a silk jammy or whatever it was.
Nice. So, get back on track here. We said we'd talk about bread and circuses. So, for those of you who aren't aware, bread and circuses is essentially we'll get into the history of it, but what we're going to talk about today is what governments or powers use to help entertain and or distract its populations. And this started, or at least this phrase was coined during the Roman Empire era, and so we'll get into that. But also to let you guys know that today's podcast is not about making people feel bad. So we're not here to say, oh, look how everybody's lazy and subdued and all this stuff. It's normal and quite healthy for everybody to have some amount of distraction, right? Whether that's you like watching a sport, following your team, you like playing Skyrim like Jason or whatever, or you spend way too much time on YouTube like me. Um, those are all kind of guilty pleasures that are necessary to a certain extent. But we thought this would be a cool episode to delve into, to talk about the different types of time killers and attention seeking things that we do in life and that have occurred historically. So let's first of all talk about bread and circuses, the phrase itself. So bread and circuses was coined by a Roman poet called Juvenal, Decimus Junius Juvenalis, but Juvenal in English is his nickname in English nowadays. So he would have existed circa the second half of the first century and the first half of the second century Common Era. This would have been in Rome. Uh, so so basically, what bread and circuses means is he was referring to a diet of entertainment or political policies on which the masses are fed to keep them happy and docile. So he would often use this phrase, sarcastically. So it implies that a population's erosion or ignorance of civic duty as a priority. It also showcases the increasing role of government later in an empire's life cycle. And we'll get into that and talk about how the Roman Empire was kind of like the first to almost create a social safety net, and how government has grown since, or at least the concept of what a government should and shouldn't do or is supposed to do to its people or for its people, was really started there and has grown exponentially since. Um, so Juvenal expressed his contempt with the declining heroism and political involvement of the general population. He saw many of them become complacent, accepting the free grain and entertainment offered by them to them by the Roman politicians. So it became the most effective way to rise to power. So, for instance, politicians, the Senate would essentially buy off its population's attention and love and votes with subsidized grain and entertainment. And when we talk about subsidized grain, So I'll get into the grain a little bit more, and then we'll talk about the fun stuff, which is the entertainment. So the Gladiator Coliseum. But first the grain. So grain doling, that's what it was called, and it's formerly known as cura annone, as the term used to describe the import and distribution of grain to the Romans. So what would happen is Rome became quite populated quite fast. I think at some point it had around 1 million people in its city, which is insane to think about for its time. And what the government of Rome started doing is it started promising that the lower tier, the poorest tier of the population, would be given grain and later on bread. However, the city and the surrounding areas could in no way feed almost, I think at that point it was almost 200,000 people that needed food or were promised food. So what they would do is they would actually import it from various parts of the world, and mainly it was Sicily and many parts of northern Africa where they'd receive the grain, import it into Rome, and distribute it to its kind of poorest 1/4 or 1/5 of the population. And that actually lasted for quite a few centuries until really the crumble of the Roman Empire. So that you could say is kind of a pretty interesting take and interesting beginnings on social safety net created by a government. Jason, do you have anything to add before we jump into the fun gladiator stuff?
Well, when I was reading through this, one thing that I came across is that the vast majority of Romans, especially in the early empire, were not Roman citizens. They were either slaves or serfs, or they were a servant class of some sort. So when you're talking about a grain dole, it seems to me as a way to keep these people appeased.
Mm-hmm.
As I'm thinking that, and there's numerous examples through history, but there's very few things that a government can do better than a free market. So there would have been a market for the grain, for the bread, for food in general. And if there's profit to be made, someone would have used the supply chains of the time to make that happen. But I see the grain doling as a way to keep your servant class at least content enough to keep on serving.
Right.
And I mean, we were not there, so we don't really know exactly the full intent. And maybe it was well intentioned at the beginning to keep people healthy and happy. Very possible. But it seems like the sort of policy that would have been used at least through its progression to buy the vote or buy the appeasement of the masses.
Right. Yeah, it's almost like it's a double-edged sword, right? It could be, hey, we're here benevolently to feed our folks that need more of the food, the starving lower tier of the population. However, exactly after that, you can't really go back, right? If you want to maintain power or be elected or anything like that, and the government before you promised and gave everyone grain throughout the year, food, then you're kind of obliged to do so if you want to get elected or maintain power.
It also reminds me of our discussion on the minimum wage,
Right.
where the idea is benevolent in theory, where you want to give people a minimum so that they can start to gain traction and provide for themselves and move on to bigger, better things. But often the end result is a dependency on that price floor, whether it be a floor of goods in the case of the grain dole, or the a floor in price in the case of minimum wage.
Right. So the as we've said, the phrase bread and circuses, bread referring to what we just talked about, which was the grain subsidies, the grain dole. Circuses, the second part, which would be the entertainment of its people. So we all know what the entertainment back in the Roman era was, and that was mainly the Gladiator Games. So talk a bit about that. There's some fun facts here. So um, first of all, most of the Gladiator Games occurred in the Colosseum, still there, still present in Rome. Really highly recommend going to visit Rome, and especially checking out the Colosseum. It's incredible, incredible just what people could build back then with the just the manpower and the lack of technology that we have today. And much of it is still standing. It's quite beautiful and incredible to see. But so if we compare it to say like a movie like The Gladiator, right, with Russell Crowe, the Ridley Scott movie, pretty neat movie. I think we both quite enjoy it. But in that movie, it shows a lot of death, right? Like basically everybody who makes it into the arena except for Maximus basically dies. That wasn't the case, even though they're extremely brutal and bloody games. The death toll in the Colosseum was about 5%. So some of you may think it was a lot higher. But the big thing is people who, I guess, who fought in there were slaves. And most of these slaves had owners, and these owners had a vested interest in keeping their gladiators alive for as long as possible. So it was is essentially an investment, right? Second is often they'd use the gladiator games as a display to often kill criminals. That's how they'd essentially get their sentence, which was a death sentence. So
And if I can interject here real quick, that kind of serves two purposes. You're entertaining the masses, but you're also setting a precedent and sending a very clear message that if you break the law, you will find yourselves on the sands of the Colosseum floor.
yeah, and that was often seen as the public hearing as well, right? That was it. That was your
So your jury
judge,
was a
jury.
bear or a lion.
Yeah, and that's the other thing. Let's talk about the interesting things they did. It wasn't just man against man or man against men. It was often man against bear, man against elephants, man against lions, tigers, you name it. Now later on, the sport evolved and they created the what they call the Circus Maximus, and that's I believe still to this day the largest coliseum or arena um, that could house people for entertainment or sport. Back in its heyday, it could hold anywhere between 150,000 people and 300,000 people. So this was a massive, massive arena, and this is where they started chariot racing, which became, I'd say, uh, a lot more closely tied to the sports we see today, right? Where you pick your player or your team, so they all had different colors, and then you root for them, you bet on them. Often, a lot of them would get rich and make their betters happy because it essentially like horse racing, right? So that became a huge sport. And just think about it: there were like 250,000, 300,000 people who could gather there in one city at that time. That's pretty incredible.
Well, you think of the modern arenas that we have today. A larger arena sits what about 80,000 people,
Yeah,
and
that's fair.
and
Yeah.
you think of the Olympics, and you think of the London Olympics that we had not too long ago. Massive stadium filled to the brim. But just the city of London today is most likely the population of the world of at the time of the Circus Maximus. So relatively speaking, this would be like fitting millions of people into a single space today. It's
Mhm.
really a marvel of what they did.
Yeah. No, it's incredible. So just to be stressed that the Roman Empire wasn't all bad. I guess it didn't just leave a dark legacy of gladiator games. For instance, it actually left us a lot of things, such as Roman numerals, aqueducts, arches, roads, highways, many surgical tools. You could argue welfare with the grain dole, and also another thing that comes with the grain dole was trading routes. Right, those were huge. The Roman Empire became massive and was then able to create trading routes across most of Europe, North Africa, some parts of Asia, the Middle East. So pretty incredible empire, which to a certain extent created globalization, right?
Well, it was a society like any others. It had its merits, it had its flaws, it had its time in the sun, and gave a lot to to its successors, to the following societies. I think of administration. That's one of the I would argue the biggest things that the Romans left to the world was accounting, was understanding, was paperwork, was law. There's a lot of structure that they developed that is still used to this day.
Mhm. Yeah, they popularized this. I'm pretty sure the book too, like the bound book. Before that, it was mainly tablets you would write on.
So a lot of these things really aren't sexy or interesting, like say the games or conquest, but it's still things that the building blocks that need to be in place to build a functioning society.
What do you think? Question: what do you think would happen if at one point there's a league that came out, or the government, I don't know, whoever, and they said, "Okay, guys, at the end of the month or whatever, we're gonna have a massive gladiator game."
So
So,
so
and
the
let's say
Hunger
like,
Games, basically.
yeah, let's say they were allowed to host this. Like they were allowed to host this. People would be like, "That's terrible." There'd be the biggest outcry in the world. Twitter would be on fire. All this stuff. Do you think though, an insane amount of people would tune in to watch that?
Well, here's the thing, man. People are malleable. I mean, back in the day, there was public executions, and I guarantee you that some people were against it, but they adapted to it and got used to it. So I bet you hold that game once a year, every 10 years, and 10 years from now, it's just part of the go to. You look forward to it like you look forward to Christmas.
I just think that even today, if like it was announced to everybody, okay, we're gonna have games of some sort, but then turns out it's pretty much gladiator games. I think everybody would act and or be outraged, and then I think there'd be record viewings of the event. I think it'd be like the biggest UFC fight you've ever seen. Everybody would tune in.
Isn't that the case for anything that's taboo? Is
Yeah.
it like the top 20 sites on the internet porn sites? The UFC was banned in Canada for years and years. Didn't stop people from watching. Anything that's, I guess, egregious, if you want to go that way,
Mm-hmm.
it's going to get eyeballs because it's dramatic, and that would definitely
Yeah.
get views.
Yeah.
And when we're talking about bread and circuses, you have Rome, a functioning society with its foibles, of course, but what I'm seeing is really a method of control, either for positive or for negative. But when the masses are distracted with the gladiator games and are kept somewhat content with a grain dole, well, they're most likely not going to take the extra step and look into policy or attend hearings in the public square or look into who is actually seating on their, or I think it was the patricians back in the day, who's sitting on their council. So the act of instilling bread in circuses is really playing on human nature, and it's playing on our laziness, our want to conserve energy. We want to feel good. We want to do as little as possible because it permitted us to survive through hardship. But at the same time, it allows the people who are in control to maintain that control.
Right. Yeah, and it gives you that dopamine hit, right? Whether that's this free bread or getting to see a guy fight a bear, gives you that excitement, that dopamine hit. And not only that, now it's promised to you, it's guaranteed to you by your government. So why would you ever want that to leave, right?
And if you have the choice between watching a guy fighting a bear, I mean, Jackie Moon wrestles a bear, versus reading through 50 pages of some new policy bill, C, X, Y, Z, well, what's going to capture your attention? It's going to be Will Ferrell in a cage against a bear, right?
Imagine. That'd be pretty funny.
Uh,
He'd probably just make the bear laugh.
you ever watch Semi Pro?
Yeah.
That's right.
God, that was a bad movie.
It was a really good bad movie.
I think you and I watched that together, actually.
Probably.
I think we rented it one night. Yeah.
Yeah,
Back
when you
when
could
we
still
rented
rent
movies.
movies.
Yeah. DVDs
um,
and VHSs, actually.
yeah, get used to getting Nintendo 64 games too. Man,
Yeah.
that's when like Friday night date night was the shit, right? You'd go to Midnight Video,
Yeah.
you'd pick out a movie, go back home, pop that into the VCR. Those are the
Yeah.
good
Get
old
some
days.
chips and dip.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about today. What circuses have become. So if we take sports today, they become a multi-billion-dollar industry. Pretty much each and every one of those major leagues. So we've got, like, for instance, the big four, right? We've got the MLB, the NBA, the NFL, and the NHL, and they typically bring in over $24 billion in revenue each year. That's combined, but I mean that's massive. The big difference now is, you could say, it's not something that's that's governed, right? It's not imposed or given to us by the government, but they're still massive corporations that get an insane amount of dollars and eyeballs on them each and every year.
Right. And one way I look at it is what value do they truly bring to society? You're not, constructing roads, you're not discovering new medicines, you're entertainment, essentially. And I find sport, at least on that scale, is a luxury. It's the sign of a society that was successful and that's made it through its expansion phase and its economic phases, and now is riding high. I find the sports in today is essentially just one large distraction. And like we were talking about earlier, like you and me both have our guilty pleasures. But what I'm seeing with sport is a lot of people are emotionally invested into their sports team or
Right.
their favorite player of whatever. And that's when I start to think that there's a bit of a problem, because you're taking your finite attention, you're taking your energy, you're letting your emotions be spiked and depressed by something that ultimately doesn't have any bearing on your life, because you're watching some millionaire throw a ball to another millionaire, and despite whichever millionaire wins that day or wins the championship, your life has not changed in any measurable sense. But that's when I start to see a problem with that level of distraction. It's you're taking what could be productive time and letting yourself be moved by something that doesn't have
Right.
anything to do with you.
Yeah, it could pump you with joy, but it could also pump you with sadness, stress. You know, it's that it could age you depending on how invested you are and how shitty your team is.
Exactly. So kind of what's the point? Like go read a book, go for a run. If you want to watch a game, sure. It's kind of like you and me dicking around on video games. All right, well, watch a game, but then just move on and do something else.
So what's because it's really easy for us to I guess kind of criticize that. I myself enjoy watching football, and like I said, I spend some time on YouTube, and we all have our dull moments or our moments of fun and bliss. But to you, what would be like a just middle? Because here's I'll give you an example or a start off point. There are some people who no doubt watch are they're let's say they're like a Toronto Maple Leafs fan or a Montreal Canadiens fan. So I'm just giving an example of two pretty intense hockey franchises with intense fans, right? And let's say one of those fans watches every single game that their team plays every year. So that's 82 games every year that they tune in for, and maybe they won't even make the playoffs, right? Maybe they're not even a good team, but that's still 82 games that they have to tune in and watch every single year. And some do it. They're emotionally invested. That's what they do every single evening. I think that's, if you ask me, that's too much, right? That's ridiculous. That's a lot of investment. But hey, to each his own. If that's really your pastime and it's your entire life's passion, go for it. What is it just middle then? If 82 games is too much to watch, what would you recommend? Because it's also hard to tell anyone or to make pretty much any human being go for a run all the time. Or, instead of watching a video on YouTube, I could be reading this super educational book, or I could be doing some research, or I could be doing push ups, or I could be cleaning the house.
Yeah, you
Right.
need your downtime, and you definitely need that rest and that pleasure to be able to go do the productive stuff after. But I would say there actually is a time where obsessing over 82 games could actually be the right move. Let's say you're Bill Gates, you've built a multi-billion dollar business, you've contributed so much to society, you've changed the way the world works. Do you know what, man? If you want to sit around and watch Toronto lose every single year, go to town, have fun. Like you've already done so much, and everything is secure in your life, and you're still able to provide and give and do. So at that point, go for it.
Yeah, you're then able to buy the most amount of farmland owned in the United States, right?
Yeah, exactly. and,
That's what Bill Gates just did.
and obviously he's an extreme example, but you get what I'm saying. And I
Yeah.
think the level of achievement that you've brought to your life is inversely proportionate to the amount of leisure time that you can take. If you're struggling to make ends meet, if the bills are adding up, if you have a lot of work to do in your life, I think hardly any downtime is appropriate. you should be running like your house is on fire, trying to build and go and get yourself to a good level.
Right.
But if you're to the point where, say, you have passive income that can support the vast majority of your bills, you have a happy, healthy family. Well, you want to take some time off. I'll say you earned it. You've
Hmm.
achieved that level. So it's all relative to where you are in your life.
Yeah, I think that's a good answer. If you look at a lot of entrepreneurs, for example, right? They'll be asked or interviewed. They'll be like, "Wow, like it's crazy that you can afford this boat," or "It's cool all the stuff you do with your family now." Blah blah blah. How do you do it? And it's like, well, I didn't. I slept 3 hours a night for 20 years, right?
Exactly. You
I
sacrifice
worked.
today
I
to
worked
have
my ass
tomorrow.
off. Yeah, yeah. So, and that's often the secret behind a lot of very successful entrepreneurs. You ask them, you look at like the Shark Tank people or the Dragon's Den people, for instance, because we know them a bit more as we know them more as celebrities. So we know a bit their financial and their entrepreneurial background. But all those people have worked. They've worked 25-hour days through most of their life before they got successful. So it's a lot of pain for the game.
And people are only going to see the success, right? They're not going to see the work that
Right.
you do in the dark. So all of a sudden you have, what's his name? Kevin O'Reilly?
O'Leary.
O'Leary, there you
Yeah.
go. So you have
Yeah. Mr.
Mr.
What's his
Wonderful.
name? Mr. Wonderful.
So he's going around, he's buying watches, he's doing podcasts, he's an angel investor, he's having fun, right? He's doing what he enjoys. He's going for bike rides in the Cayman Islands. All right, cool. But like you said, he spent 25 years working 25-hour days.
Yeah.
So good for him. Now he has the luxury to be able to do what he wants to do. And if he wants to fly across the country, no, when you're allowed to, and watch every single sports match that there is, then sure, power to him. He's earned it.
Right. Yeah.
But I would think that just to add to that, it's distraction is often it's a dopamine hit, right? It's a little bit of
Right.
feel good. It gets you out of your reality for the amount of time that you're doing it. But it's also a bit of a trap, right? So if your world is not the way you want it to be, it's almost easier to succumb into those distractions because I'm going to go for the immediate feel good. It's nicer than the feel bad of reality. So when you have the millionaire and the billionaire or the successful entrepreneur, well, that person would almost it almost be understandable that person would not want to engage in these distractions because they've built a reality that is already so pleasurable just to exist in as a baseline. So
Right.
it's almost like it's more difficult for the person who's struggling, who's just starting out, to have that discipline to put those distractions aside to get going.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's not only just a dopamine hit you get with relaxing or being entertained or anything like that, but with the circus aspect of it, is that aside from the dopamine hit, it's comfortable. It's not scary. And again, if you look like an entrepreneur who works 25 hours a day, a lot, especially at the beginning, a lot of what they do is not only hard work, but it's very uncomfortable work. They probably had to question their self confidence a bunch of times. They probably did a lot of things that they didn't know how to do very well, which makes you feel very doubtful and uncomfortable and all of these things. Whereas if you're entertained or choose to, I guess, take the circus route most of your life, then of course you'll have so much more comfort, and you'll have a lot less of that kind of displeasure. But is that the right path to take in the long run?
Exactly. Or working a job that gets you by. Well, it's almost the bread aspect. You know you're getting that steady 50,000 a year salary. You might not enjoy your job, but you can go on a vacation every now and then. At least the bills are paid. Sure, you had an idea for a business, but it's a lot of work to get it started. You don't really know how to get it going. There's a lot of uncomfort and questions there. So might as well just stay on the tried and true that you know is not going anywhere.
Right. You don't know if the government will order you to shut down your business too. So
Exactly.
that doesn't help. Hey, side note here, like that's my big one of my many concerns about all of this COVID pandemic and lockdown stuff. But one of my huge concerns is, other than the amount of private businesses that have already been crippled, won't this simply discourage almost all entrepreneurs or budding entrepreneurs to ever create a brick and mortar business?
William, you're thinking too
Like,
much. That's too deep. Whoa, no. You're way
Yeah.
beyond the level of a politician here. Slow down. Hang on. Bonk your head against that wall 4 or 5 times, okay?
Yeah, but like you know what I mean, right? It's crazy.
Uh,
Like
It is.
to me, anyone, even a very intelligent and capable entrepreneur, would just be like, well, screw that. If the government for almost any reason can within 48 hours make me close my doors to the outside world to be able to make any form of living for my family, then who would ever want to do that?
And the government has apparently the power to decide what business is essential, what business is
Yep.
unessential, who will get support, who will not get support, when, if, and how people are allowed to frequent your business. So yeah, you're demoralizing your society and you're crushing the entrepreneurial spirit.
Yeah, like you want to talk about, bad policies that created brain drains in certain regions or countries, throughout our history, and you're like, well, this has got to be the biggest brain drain and dream crushing policy you could ever implement.
And what does it do? Well, it makes more people dependent, especially on the bread aspect of bread and circuses. Because now you start
Absolutely.
to get these government programs, which need to be funded somehow. And history has taught us that time and again, there's always a reason to expand government. There's always a reason to expand the money supply. There's always a reason to restrict freedom. But it never ends well for the society who goes down that road.
And I'd argue that the mainstream media these days has become a sort of circus as well, right? Like
Absolutely.
even the way they cover COVID, it's all about the bad news every single day, right? So it's a different kind of dopamine hit, but it's still a dopamine hit and an obsession, a hook that keeps people coming and people dependent on that news and on those stories and on the
And
fear.
again, it plays on human nature. We're more sensitive to negative emotion than positive emotion. Because back in our day, when we were very vulnerable, we didn't have houses, we didn't have shelter. We were sure we might have been more capable on an intellectual standpoint than the animals around us, but we're a lot more vulnerable physically. So if something bad were to happen, it was really important that we got a great reaction to avoid that, so we don't get eaten or we don't get injured, and then
Right.
we're disabled. So when you see what the media is doing, I remember noticing that as a kid too. I was like, why is the news always negative? There's so much good in the
Always.
world. And this was me like at 14, 15. I'm thinking it was a little bit of a simplistic thought experiment, but it was, well, if you just highlighted the good news instead of the bad news, wouldn't people feel better and probably be a little bit happier? Like it's a very simple thought, but it still rings true. And I think that's why the media has to do that, is because if it was positive news, they would not get the same viewership as they get
Oh,
when
definitely.
it's negative news. So
Yep.
they're playing on that human instinct, whether they know it or not, which they most
Yeah.
likely do.
I mean, you saw those numbers with during wartime, right? Whenever there's like a war overseas, then the media, the ratings go up. The whole 4 years with Donald Trump, the ratings were up, right? So this doom and gloom thing is definitely a huge sales tactic for the circus aspect of it. Now let's finish with the social media. I think both of us could agree that this has become like the purest slash worst form of distraction of circuses. What are your thoughts?
Well, it's like any technology. It's neither good nor bad. It just is. And then it's implementations that can be positive or negative. Example, nuclear energy. You know,
Yep.
it's you can do a lot with it for good or for bad. So when it comes to social media, and again, it's always what does it do to the human animal? Well, it's still those dopamine hits, it's those likes, but now it's those comparisons, it's that ease of access. It plays on so many aspects that we naturally gravitate to when we live in a world of scarcity. If something's easy, we're going to go for it. If something makes us feel good, we're going to go for it. If something makes us feel slightly more connected, we're going to go for it. And it's a really pure distillation of all these things put into one really small space. And like we're tribal animals, we work well with a small enough team, 100, something like you can remember 150 names, and that's because there was 150 people on average in the tribes back in the day. I'm probably getting that wrong, but you get the idea.
Yeah. Yeah.
But now all of a sudden you have essentially infinite people to connect to, which is a good thing because now your business can grow. You have more outreach, which is
You can network.
you
Yeah.
can network. So there's a positive aspect there. But the negative is now that the comparison is you're being compared to an infinitely large pool of people instead of your immediate surrounding. And you'll see like a lot of that effect on dating. You'll see a lot of that on self-esteem. You'll see that on like comparing yourself to your neighbors in terms of material wealth.
Yeah, I'd be curious actually, just another side note, but if since the age of social media, adultery has increased due to social media.
Most likely. I mean, it's like anything. It's accelerated the exchange of information, and if the information that you're looking for is a way to cheat on your spouse, then yeah, just like anything else, right? It's neither good nor bad. It just offers more connectivity for to do whatever you want to do.
Right. Yeah.
But as far as a circus goes, it's the ultimate circus. It's in your phone. It's in your pocket. You can touch it any time. I know I have my phone on me as pretty much always, and every now and then I have to remember. Okay, just leave it at home and go do your stuff. Forget about it
Yeah.
for a while.
That's what I think is so dangerous about it is that it's so instant. It's so instant, it's infinite, right? Like you can be on Instagram all the time. And then when you're like, oh, okay, I've spent enough time on Instagram, you go on Facebook or Twitter, whatever it is, to get the next dopamine hit. And the other thing you mentioned, kind of now you have a pool of a larger, almost infinite pool of people, is that now too, what often happens is you get to see only the best slash almost fake parts of someone's relationship, right? So I've often noticed that is
And
you'll have a couple and you know them well and they have their fights and maybe even at that point the couple's not doing very well, but all you see on Facebook or Instagram are like it looks like it's a honeymoon 24/7, right?
here's the thing. Usually the tell on that, the harder someone's trying to convince you of something like that, most likely the opposite is true. So the
Right.
couple that's fighting, but they're always in love online. Well,
Yeah.
yeah, maybe not.
Yeah, maybe it's the tip of the iceberg. Yeah.
But and again, like if you're a ruling class, well, social media is the greatest thing since sliced bread, right? Or at least the bread dole. Because now all the plebs and the peasants are occupied with that little box, and you have access to them at any time with targeted advertisement. So there you go.
Yeah, that would be another topic, but advertisement too now, thanks to technology and social media, is crazy. Like they predict things like company like Amazon will be able to just based off of like your browsing and your activity and your behavior on social media and on your devices that they'll be able to now predict what you may or may not want to purchase and they'll just deliver it to your door and then you can choose to purchase it or not. Things like that, right?
That's just
It's
that's just
crazy.
dystopian. And another talk we could have sometimes on privacy, the importance, the need, what it is, what it isn't. And I think that's something that we're seeing a lot more in culture. And then you have cancel culture on top of that, and the right to speech and the right to be left alone, really.
Right. Yeah, no, privacy is a huge topic now, and it's something I find a little scary, considering all our devices can now pretty much spy on us.
True, true. So, is there anything you want to add before we close this one off?
Not really. The one thing I would say, like the moral of the story too, or the message we can finish with is there is a just middle, right? I think it's normal for all of us to enjoy a bit of social media, a bit of YouTube, a bit of hockey, whatever it may be, but there is that just middle um, where you should still put a lot of thought and effort and time into constructive things as well. Plus, when you do a lot of constructive things, then I find that the bread and circuses part of your life feels a bit more rewarding and a bit more worthwhile.
Yeah. What tastes better? A beer after a long day of construction, or a beer after six other beers?
Yeah, exactly. After you wake up in the morning.
Exactly.
All right. Well, I think we'll leave it there, guys. This was another episode of Thought Crimes on bread and circuses. And join us next time. Cheers.
Cheers.